Hello and welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart and welcome to another Epic Battles Waterloo Napoleonic painting tutorial. Now, I think this will be the fourth or fifth painting tutorial I've done. I've lost track with what I've recorded and what I've published, so forgive me. And all of my tutorials so far have been based on the British. It was the British that I received first from Warlord Games when they kindly sent me a review stock. But they recently sent me a frame of the French infantry to review, along with some other bits as well. So I thought I'll have a go at some French. I've got a lot of things planned. I think if I worked out earlier that if I did a tutorial based on every single different miniature in the release, or type of miniature, so to speak, or unit type, it would like be 28, 29, 30, something like that, and not sure I'll get through those all, or if people would want to see that many. But I've had quite a few people ask me about when I'm doing the French, what I would do with the French, and it's been easy up until now, so I haven't had any. And so until the release is due at the end of January, and I'm recording this on the 15th, I believe, until the release is due, I wouldn't been able to do it. But I've got this frame now, and I thought, well, I haven't really got time to sit and do a whole stand of the regular infantry, but you have the wonderful Voltigeurs skirmisher miniatures on this frame, which you don't get with the British frame. You have rifles in line. You don't get the French, you don't get the rifles skirmishing until the later released Highlander frame comes out, and we don't have a date for that. So I thought, well, this is a perfect opportunity to have a little bit of fun, do a bit of a palette cleanser and change tack a little bit and paint some French. So I thought, right, let's do it. Let's go ahead and paint some French. I'm actually going to work on two. You get a mix of models on the French frame, some in great coats, some in normal battlefield dress. I've got one of each here. I've completed the rest of the other six. You get 8 on a frame. I've completed the other 6, so as soon as these are done, I'll be able to add them to the bases as well, and be done with them. Right then, so I'm going to kind of switch between the two. When I've got a colour that works on both miniatures, you'll probably see me painting both. I should say, and those of you who have watched more than one of my painting guides for these miniatures, the miniatures are prepared using a Zenithal pre-highlight, so they're primed black, and then with the Zenithal highlight, a fairly heavy one, using white, so as if the light source is coming down mostly from the top, but I do go in from both sides as well, and it kind of gives you a bit of a grayscale look for the miniature, and that is very much deliberate. And after that, I dry brush with white as well, and it's to do with getting the most out of contrast paints. I do apologise if you've heard me say this a lot, but we have to assume that people may come into one of these videos having not seen the others. So the idea is I base coat with contrast paints, and the pre-highlight it basically gives you multiple tones already, even more so than when you just paint contrast over white, so you get a little bit of natural shadow in there where the shadow is already showing on the miniature. I do highlight then afterwards, but it does show you the kind of effect you can have if you wanted to paint a little bit quicker and just use contrast. So the first colour I'm going to be using is Contrast Apothecary White, and this is essentially a grey paint that gives you a bit of a wash, really, and the idea is that it dries in the recesses and helps you shade your white. So if you paint a model white and paint this as a wash afterwards. Now this is already fairly grayscale, so there's a lot I don't need to do. What I am going to do is make sure that it's just placed around on the trousers, which are going to be white, but I'm actually going to do this greatcoat grey as well, a lightish grey, and you can use Apothecary White to paint grey, funnily enough, because it is grey. So I'm just going to give a very faint glaze of this over the miniature, which will soften down where I've dry brushed, and then just allow it to go in on the trousers and things as well. And when I go back and highlight later, there's lots of white on these miniatures, so lots of white on the straps, on the webbing. I'm not sure webbing's the right word for this period, but I've used it a lot recently, so forgive me. So next up, using Contrast Gore Grunt of Fur, I'm going to be painting the stock of the musket, and then I'm going to be painting the most of the pack. I'm going to leave a little bit here where the top flaps over, just to give that kind of representation of the multicoloured hide. Sometimes you saw the sort of white and brown patterns on them. I think it creates a nice effect, and we'll come back to that later. But that will be the stage for now on both miniatures. So that's the Gore Grunter fur on both miniatures. On the one on your left hand side here, I've also painted his hair and moustaches in the same colour. Right, so the next stage will be to do that other part of the pack I was talking about, that top flap. Now you could quite easily paint that in the Gore Grunter fur as well, as they quite often would be all one colour, but I really do like the look when it looks like the hide skin. So I'm going to use some skeletal horde just to give a slight impression of a different colour. Now you could do it white, but there's going to be so much white on this miniature that giving it a yellowish base will just make it look a little bit distinct and a little bit different from the rest of the miniature. Right, next up we have the start of the blue, and that's only going to be on the battle dress miniature because the great coat is covering all of the blue on the other one. So I'm going to be using contrast ultramarines blue. Now I'm really interested in some of the Army Painter speed paints range. It isn't quite out yet at this range. I've seen some review videos online that means that I might be tempted to switch over to one of those. I think Cloudburst Blue is one that I've seen used as a direct comparison to this Ultramarines Blue, but this used to work pretty well, so I'm going to go ahead and use it on these miniatures at least, and you can make your own decisions if you're using, following these along. You can make your own decisions. There's a lot of white on these miniatures, even the fronts of the jackets, and I'm leaving the epaulets at the front as well. So sorry, the cuffs and the epaulets as well. So there's not actually as much blue as you think there might be on show, because so much of it's covered by packs and things like that. So that's the blue on. Might have to do a few touch-ups later, but I'm going to move on and do the base layers of flesh now, and for that I'm using contrast Guilliman flesh. So that's the faces and hands. And for the guy in the great coat who I haven't done his hair and moustaches, I'm going to use contrast wildwood. Now the first bit of brighter colour, I'm going to use some contrast Blood Angels red. I'm just going to use this on the facings. That just depend on which regiments you are doing. The colours change. There's a lot of things that are repeated for your light troops anyway. I believe this is for the regiment that I've picked. Is the 65th. I've definitely checked my sources, and I know that they were fighting at the engagement I'm working towards first at Victoria, but these things are repeated quite a lot. And I imagine when you're doing Voltigeurs and you've just got a few bases of them to represent skirmish lines, you could probably go a little bit generic. These miniatures are all pretty individual as it is, so you could go a little bit generic and just use them to represent the light troops of whichever regiment you're using at the time, depending on how you like to wargame and how fully accurate you want to be. There is a little bit of red at the top of the epaulets. They don't show very well. Some of these miniatures, they have what I would call a little bit of soft detail between the backpack and the shoulders and the epaulets, where they the detail's a bit stretched. So from front and back they look spot on, but from top down sometimes you can see the pack stretches over there and is a bit angular. So sometimes on some of the miniatures it's the same with the epaulets. They seem to be stretched a little bit further than they would be in reality, so you have to kind of paint in the detail a little bit. So the next colour I'm going to be using is Contrast Orc Flesh, and this is a fairly bright green. I'm going to be using it in two places. The rest of the epaulets on the sides of it, and on the bottom half of the plume at the top. The actual top will be yellow, which we'll do a little bit later on. Now let's add that yellow in on the top of the plumes, and I'm using the Iandan yellow contrast. So all contrast so far. Now it's time for some black, so contrast black Templar. We're looking at boots, shakos, and equipment around the belt. So your ammunition pouches and things like that. So we're getting very close to the end of the base coat now. We're going to put the first of the metallics on, so I'm going to use a scale colour. So this is scale 75 black metal. And we're just going to put it on the gun barrel, on the bayonet. So now on to some of the other metallics. So I'm going to use some Necro Gold as my scale colour, or scale 25 as well. Going to do the Shako badge and a little bit of trim around the top of the Shakos. Now for this regiment, depending on which picture you look at, it looks sort of gold, or sometimes looks yellow. I've decided to go with gold, a little bit easier to paint over black than yellow anyway, so one may or may not be right. I don't mind. I think that the gold just makes it show up and pop a little bit more anyway, so that's what we're going to go with. So we've reached that stage of the miniature where you can base them and go from there, and they look absolutely fine. You might want to highlight the white a little bit, but even without touching it, and that pre-highlight of zenithal is giving enough of appearance of white. But what I'm going to do is just now go around and highlight most of the colours, not everything, but most of the colours, just to make certain areas pop a little bit more. I'm going to start with the flesh. And if you've watched the other videos, you'll have seen this paint before, so I'm going to use Noctura's Fairy Flesh. That's a Vallejo colour. I'm really just picking out bridge of nose, cheekbones, and if they look a little bit bright afterwards, I will then knock them back a little bit again with a little bit of a glaze. And now is the time for that glaze, just to tone that back a little bit. So back with the contrast Guilliman Flesh, 50-50 with water. And all I'm doing is just dropping it back over very subtly. I've just highlighted, and as simple as that, it just tones it back that little tiny bit. Harder to see on camera than it is to the naked eye, but it just makes the face have a little bit more definition. So now time to highlight the blue. I'm going to be using Citadel Macragge Blue. Now, when I was first looking for colours to highlight the blue, this didn't really even get a look in. It just looked wrong through the colour of the pot. And then I was looking at actual colour charts, and I noticed that the Macragge Blue looked right on the colour charts, but not as the actual paint. I thought I'd give it a little bit of a go, and actually it works quite well when it's on the model. Just didn't look right in the pot, and sometimes it's just a bit of trial and error and you find something that works. So next up, to highlight the green and the yellow. For the green, I'm using Army Painter Greenskin, and for the yellow, I'm using Model Colour Flat Yellow. So the next stage is only on the guy with a great coat. I'm going to be using some Grey Seer by Citadel. I'm just using that to do a slight highlight in certain areas. There's not a lot to do really. You can already see some natural highlights are in from the pre-highlight. It's just nice to pick out a little bit. Now you can do a mix of different colours on grey coats when you see the completed bases at the end. I've done one that's more of a kind of a yellowy browny colour. You can use brown as well. When I do the full infantry tutorial, I'll probably demonstrate some different versions that you can do. But right now, grey will have to suffice. Now the next stage really makes it start to come together in my opinion, and that is touching up the white. So I'm using Vallejo model colour off-white, and I'm going to be highlighting the trousers, I'm going to be touching up the cross belts, and then on the back as well we've got straps that go over the pack and the bedroll, and I'll even do some little highlights on the top of the pack there as well. There's another white part area there, the back of the trousers. It really tidies it up and makes it pop. It's the same with the guy with the great coat as well. So I'm going to highlight the gold trim with scale colour Elven Gold. I'll notice that I put a little bit of gold rounds there, sword and bayonets as well, and with some of the pictures I saw, they've got some yellow or gold tassels attached to the sword as well. I don't think this miniature's got it modelled on, but some of them do, but it is quite hard to pick out the detail of them on these models. I guess that doesn't really matter so much at this scale. So now to highlight the silver, we have Game Air Silver, one of my favourites and go-to colours. Now I just want to do the top extremities of the bayonets, a little way along the top of the barrel, and then also the bands as well. So one final thing that I've been doing with these is doing a tiny little bit of black lining, and I very rarely like to do this. So I'm going to be using Contrast Black Templar. It's strong enough in pigment that you can paint thin lines with it. This is the beauty of contrast when they're somewhere between a paint and a wash. Now, I find that the areas between sort of red cuffs and blue jacket isn't defined enough. So it just helps them pop a little bit more, just to paint a few little black lines in. Again, very much an optional extra. You don't have to do these. I've just found that it kind of tidies them up a little bit. And there we are, all finished. So after I finish the black lining, I attach them to the bases with the other men, and we're done, and you get the idea of the full effect. Now I've decided to stick them 4 to a base. I think in the images on the box art that they have 6, and so I think you'll get 24, so that'll be 4 bases worth is what they're advertising. But I think we're doing them this way. you can get 2 bases per sprue then, rather than 1.5. It goes a little bit further. This is how I based the Epic American Civil War that I got from them. It's just totally up to you really. You can do what you want with your own miniatures, but I think I'm going to go forward to a base, and maybe what they're expecting anyway. I might have misremembered, but yeah, I think they look pretty good. A nice little bit of character to these. It's nice to have a little bit of sort of dead space on the base that you can kind of put something else. You see, I've put a couple of little flowers there rather than just normal tufts. We don't want to put too many because you don't want to look like they're dancing among flower fields where the rank and file are trudging through the mud and things. But yeah, I think it shows it quite nicely. Let me show you the other stand that I have painted, but let me just turn this slightly first. You can see the ones that we've worked on the edge there. So the grey coats and the blue jacket, and at the back you can see the different style great coat that I was talking about. And these are the other 4 that I've done as well. More sort of standard uniforms in that one, but I think they come out quite nicely. Lots of extra little bits of detail on there, but they're still relatively easy to do. The difference between them and the British infantry is while they have more little fiddly bits to pick out, like the epaulettes, there's less white cross belts to paint in, so to speak. So they're actually being painted in here over the front of a white uniform anyway, because the red jacket, the blue jackets don't quite cover the whole chest. They've got the white frontage on them, and it actually, by using the zenithal pre-highlights, or even just if you just painted them white first and used a shade, or used something like the apothecary white contrast paint, it'd save you quite a lot of time with that. So I think they're going to be slightly quicker to paint up than the British infantry. I think it may well just feel easier because you're not doing so much of that mind-numbing painting of the cross belts and things at the front. So it's probably about the same when you add in all the other little bits of trim, but it feels better. Anyway, I'm going to pop a couple of other images of them now up on the screen, as I usually do at the end of the videos, them in a sort of scenic shot or something like that. Thanks very much for watching this one. I have, as the time of recording, I haven't got a plan of which thing I'm going to do next. So I may be swayed by comments. I know I sort of mentioned that in my last painting tutorial. I'm thinking that it should involve a horse next time. I seem to have avoided that so far, but we will see. So if you do have any thoughts about what you'd like to see painted next, let me know. It may not do what you have asked, but I'm getting comments across different platforms on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter as well and things. So if there's an overwhelming number of people who are asking for the same thing, I may well go ahead and do that next, but probably cavalry based. I have all the French and all of the British, so let me know what you think. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. Give us a subscribe, give us a like, and I'll catch you all soon.